You are listening to Attractive Relationships, the podcast where we dive deep into the art and science of relationships and communication. I'm Rico Armstrong, your host and advocate for attractive, happy relationships. In a world where relationships play a crucial role in our personal and professional lives, understanding how to communicate to connect with others is essential. Transform your communication skills to increase your social status, your social confidence, and help you gain the best relationships you can have. Welcome to Attractive Relationships. I think we can agree that shaming, language, or judging people with our words, or having a bad tone and attitude when we speak are things that we don't like hearing in communication. In fact, we've heard phrases like you can attract more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. Although, sidebar, I don't know why we would want to attract flies for good reasons. But the point being is that if you want to be more attractive in how you speak, shaming and judging and coming with a bad tone and attitude is not the way to do that. It's not the way to connect with people. And yet we see that a lot of people, and you might even argue that most people communicate in this style from time to time. Maybe it manifests itself, for example, when something didn't go right or didn't go your way, or you see how something didn't go a person's way and then they respond with an attitude, like, I can't believe you got my order wrong. I ordered blah, 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 blah. And it comes with that attitude. Or if you're at work and the boss says, uh, judges you or shames you and says you didn't do a good enough job in so many words. And even if that is the truth, the way that it comes across is not in an encouraging way, but more of simply, you didn't do a good job, therefore you did a bad job. That's judging that you did something bad. That's judgment. And we even see it in our relationships. Maybe we've had a disagreement with the person that you're dating or married to, and in certain language, somebody said to you, "You're wrong." That's judgment. Or if somebody said, "You're stupid for thinking that or saying that," or "You're not right," or you can't do that. All right. That's shaming. Like, you're not good enough to do that. This language creeps up in our daily lives. And yet, while it creeps up, and we may be guilty, I'm putting myself in that, we may be guilty of using that language. And yet, we all agree that that is language that is damaging to our ability to connect with people, to build relationships with people, to be likable with people. And, and, and so the question that I have is, who taught us how to communicate this way? And how can we make sure that we're not communicating that way? How can we be better, even if this is what we've been taught? And so some of this, if you see this book behind me, if you're watching on YouTube, A Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. This is a fantastic book, by the way. If you're into reading books and you've read the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, I would put this one right up there with that book. Uh, yeah, it's fantastic, and it goes into how we can kind of correct the way that we talk to people. So I'm going to mention some things in this book that may be helpful to you. But before I do that, I really would like your feedback. So if you are listening to the podcast and if you follow me on social media, Coach Rico Strong on Instagram, or Attractive Relationships on Instagram and TikTok, please message me or send me a video. I'm curious to know how do you think we learned to communicate this way? I don't have a clear answer on this. I'm just going to give you my thoughts, and I'm curious to know what you might have to add if you agree or disagree or have a different thought. Who taught us how to communicate this way? I think it's two things. I think we see leaders or people with influence speak this way. This is this the recording of this episode is happening in the summer of 2024, and there's about to be an election here in the United States. Every election that I've ever heard where the future leaders of the country and even current leaders of this country are using that shaming and judging language. They're using it against the opponent who's running against them for the presidency or for whatever office of politics. The shaming and judging language is used for against an entire party. All right. So if you are left, you go to the right and say that whole, you know, the right is stupid. The right is wrong. That's a funny way to say that, but I think you get what I mean, right? And the right does the same thing to the left, like, oh, everybody over there, they're stupid, they're wrong, they don't, and so the collective we, see people who have ascended to a level of leadership that few would ever get to, and we might think to ourselves, well, that must be the way I have to speak if I want to be a leader, if I want to be ahead, uh, and things like that. So I think that's one. We see people in influence and power speak in the way of judgment and shaming or bad attitude, which is again we what we don't really like, but maybe we feel like we need to. The second thing, and this is the one I'm really interested to know your thoughts on, is it's how we were raised. It's how we were raised. And I think it happens innocently by our parents. Our parents taught us how to communicate this way for a lot of us. Maybe not all of us, but a lot of us. For example, if maybe you had an experience when you were a child where you did something that was labeled wrong, right? Like you got your hand in the cookie jar because you wanted a cookie, but you didn't want to ask permission for that cookie, and then you got caught. And your mom or dad came up and said, bad boy or bad girl. That's judging language. They labeled and judged you as bad. Notice they didn't necessarily label the action, they labeled you. Bad boy, or bad girl. And the same thing in reverse, like good girl, good boy when you did something good. But we grew up hearing those things, not labeling the actions that were good or bad, but labeling us as individuals as good or bad because of that action. Do you hear the difference? Or there's a shaming language that I think a lot of young kids go through, and maybe you can relate um, to some of the shaming language that may have happened as a kid that made you feel that you weren't good enough. Maybe you were in school and you were trying out for the team and you got made fun of telling you how much you suck at something or how terrible you are. Or maybe you're just playing with kids in the neighborhood when you were younger before you could be on a team. And kids made fun of you and said you're ugly or again, you suck. You're not good enough to hang out with us. Um, and even sometimes at home, that language maybe has accidentally crept in from our parents to us. And so again, these are just a few examples. Let me know what you think about this thought, because again, this is not something that I've read or really studied on. It's just things that I muse about in my head, and I'm really curious to have this conversation with you. But looking at people who are of influence and power, and then looking at how we were raised, the bad way of communicating, there I go using judgment language, but using it towards the action of communicating in a way that none of us like and none of us appreciate, none of us feel necessarily motivated to to listen to that style of communication when it's directed towards us, and yet this is what we were influenced by. If that is the case, how can we change what has potentially been a massive and long-standing influence in our life on how to communicate? How can we do better? Hey, real quick, this is a message for all the good men out there who are wanting a really happy relationship with your girlfriend or spouse, but maybe sometimes that doesn't always happen. And it's not for a lack of trying, but
frustrations happen and arguments happen, and they happen more often than you would like. And so what happens is you come home from a hard day at work wanting to get a little bit of rest, maybe a little bit of food and time with the person that you really care about and love. But instead, what happens is you get greeted with more stress. Maybe you are reminded constantly of how you are being a disappointment because you didn't take the trash out or do the chores when she wanted, or you weren't as responsible with money, or you spend too much time on your video games. And she seems to just always tell you where you are disappointing as opposed to telling you where she appreciates you. And this kind of environment usually leads to a lot of frustration, a lot of fighting, less sex in the relationship, less connection in the relationship. And then all of a sudden you find yourself coming home a little bit later every day because you're not wanting to come home so quickly to all that stress. Or you sit in the parking lot and scroll your phone and play a game because you have to mentally prepare for what you might get into when you get home. And for any good man, that's not ideal. And it's definitely not ideal for the woman that you're with. What we want is a way to have these conversations where you feel respected and appreciated, and she is more willing to respect you and follow you and fight with you less. How does that happen? And so on June 25th, 2024, there's going to be a free training. And I'm going to tell you exactly how 3 mistakes that most guys do. You want to avoid those, as well as the skill required to make those conversations happy and make your woman respect you more and fight with you less. Free live training. Click the link in the show notes, and I'll see you there.
And that's why I would recommend this might be the first book I would recommend for anybody who wants to learn how to communicate in a way that connects with people and makes people want to do things right by you, is the book Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. You can find it on Amazon and get to you quickly. It's not a difficult read. And similar to the Chris Voss Never Split the Difference, a couple of things that I've really learned. It goes back to the 3 fundamentals I say that is universal across the board for all communication. Lead with curiosity, be clear, and be courteous. If you lead with curiosity, that alone will help us avoid most of the things that lead to language that shames or judges people. All right. So for example, if you're in a relationship with somebody, a romantic relationship with somebody, and your partner does something that you don't appreciate, maybe you don't understand, and maybe in your mind you're like, my partner did something stupid or careless. Well, those thoughts are automatically things that judge. We've judged what they've done as stupid or careless or wrong in some sort of way. And if the first thing we do when we try to address it is say, why did you do that? Technically, that is leading with curiosity. However, leading with the question of why is the one question that I try to avoid at all cost when leading with curiosity. And the reason why is because it makes the other person defensive. We are asking the other person to explain the logical, rational, justifiable reasons for their actions. Is that really what you want from them? Probably not. What we really want is for them to understand where we might be coming from and asking them to defend their position, especially if it comes with that tone, that attitude that we might have when we are attacking somebody. It's going to make them more dug in. So when I lead with curiosity, I will either start with a statement and then a follow-up question, or I'll go straight into a question that doesn't start with why. Again, if you avoid starting with the question, why did you dot dot dot, you will avoid a lot of the shaming and judging language that'll come from you almost instantly. So I'm trying to think of an example where um, maybe it's something like, "Hey, I noticed the trash wasn't taken out," you know, and I might just stop there, or I might say, "I noticed the trash didn't get taken out. You usually do it," you know, um, and then maybe I will try to come up with an excuse for them. You know, did you sleep in today, or did something come up at work, or something along those lines? Or I may not come up with the excuse, but I might say, instead of asking why didn't you take the trash out, I might just say, what happened this morning? And then I make sure that my tone of voice is in a non-threatening, non-judgmental tone. I find that I get a lot farther with that. Or if you're at work and maybe you're in a leadership position and you are relying on somebody to get a certain task done, and yet they didn't do the task or they didn't do it correctly. Would it be best if you came up and say, "Hey, I told you to do this task and you didn't do it. Why didn't you do it?" How do you think the other person is going to respond? They're probably going to be very defensive. Or you could ask, "Hey, I noticed this project didn't get done. What's going on? Like, is there what do you need help with?" And that is less threatening and gives more inclination for the other person to open up, because you came from a place of curiosity instead of judgment. So I think that's one way, is leading with curiosity. Now, being clear is the second thing about communication that's important, as far as just being able to connect with people. But I'm going to skip to the third part, which is being courteous or tactful. And all that really means is we don't want to hurt the other person's feeling or make them defensive unnecessarily. And if you've been hearing what's been talked about so far, you'll understand that if you lead with curiosity, you are far less likely to make the other person defensive, to hurt their feelings, uh, to make them feel like they're less than. Because if we do those things, what's the normal reaction? The other person is going to shut down. The other person is not going to really say what's on their mind. And they're definitely far less likely to come to the perspective that you would like for them to come to. Again, leading with curiosity and being tactful and courteous is not what you see from a lot of the people of power and influence that get the most attention. And maybe we didn't get enough of that when we were growing up. If you had your hand in the cookie jar and the package of cookies and you knew you should have asked permission, but you didn't, maybe your parents, because they were upset and they just led with their emotions instead of leading with curiosity, shamed you and judged you, said, "Bad boy" or "bad girl, you shouldn't have done that." But instead, what if they would have been like, "Hey, uh, what made you grab the cookies?" You know, and maybe a conversation would have ensued. It's like, "Well, I didn't have lunch, or I was really hungry. I didn't know what else to get." And then there could be a conversation instead of blaming and judging. It's like, "Well, next time when you're hungry, just ask. I'll be happy to help you." Or, "Hey, I understand where you're coming from. If I was hungry, I'd get something to eat too. But when we do this, it has this effect. It spoils your dinner," or whatever you want to say. Next time, make sure to ask. And that's just something that's not practiced, I think, in households, and it's definitely not practiced in relationships today as much as we would like to see it. So ultimately, if we are trying to ask the question, how can we be better than the examples that we see set today? We have to have an awareness. If you don't think that you do this, if you don't think that you don't from time to time speak in a way that shames or judges people or has bad tone, um, we might need to reevaluate ourselves, um, because all of us do it. All of us do it. But I would highly recommend, again, nonviolent communication. That's something that has really helped me. It is also something that when I coach other people on how to communicate better and how to engage better, um, the things that are mentioned in this episode are just a couple of those things. And if you are looking to increase the ability to connect with others, um, without shaming and judging them, to get them to open up and maybe see your perspective, I am happy to help. Just DM the word communicate to me on social media. Again, Coach Rico Strong on Instagram, or at Attractive Relationships on Instagram and TikTok. And I will be more than happy to help you in any way that I can. Until next time. As we come to the end of another episode of Attractive Relationships, I want to express my gratitude to you for tuning in. Your support really does mean the world to me. Now, if this episode brought you any value, I would truly appreciate it if you shared this podcast with anyone that you think could benefit from our discussions on effective communication and relationship building. Until next time, remember, great relationships start with great communication. So stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep building those attractive relationships.